Beneath the silver glow of the moon lies the Holloway orchard, a land whispered about in fear and silence. When Evelyn Holloway and her siblings inherit the forgotten estate, they expect decay and emptiness. Instead, they find trees that bloom at midnight, bearing fruit that glows with an unholy light. The air is heavy with secrets, the soil steeped in blood, and every shadow seems alive. As whispers rise from the branches, the family realizes they haven't inherited land, they've inherited a curse. And the orchard's hunger is only just beginning. Inheritance under the moon, the road had been empty for miles, save for the skeletal outline of trees stretching out like gaunt fingers against the twilight sky. Evelyn Holloway gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles whitening as the car crept down the cracked asphalt toward the property their family had inherited, a place she had hoped never to see again. Behind her, Lucas shifted impatiently in the back seat, his restless eyes darting between the darkening woods and the crumbling sign that read Holloway Orchard. Beside him, Margaret clutched a faded stuffed rabbit, her small frame hunched against the chill creeping through the open window. The town itself had been forgotten by most maps, a ghost of a place where time seemed to have folded inward. Evelyn's fingers trembled slightly as she recalled the letter that had brought them here, an unexpected bequest from an uncle she barely remembered. The orchard, a stretch of land shrouded in family whispers and old warnings, left untouched for decades. They pulled up to the rusted gates, the hinges groaning in protest as Evelyn pushed them open. The scent hit her first, a strange mix of earth dampened by rain long gone, and something faintly sickly sweet, like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. It was a smell that clung to the skin and burrowed into the lungs. "This place," Lucas muttered, eyes wide as the trees loomed overhead, branches tangled like knotted fists against the dark sky. "It's just an orchard," Evelyn replied, though her voice was thin, betraying her own unease. "We'll figure it out." But as they stepped onto the uneven ground, the orchard seemed to pulse beneath their feet, not the gentle life of growing things, but something older, darker. Margaret's gaze was fixed on the trees, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, a shiver ran through her small frame. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Evelyn paused, listening. At first, there was only the rustle of dry leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. But then, beneath it, a faint susurration, like whispered voices, carried on the wind, barely audible but unmistakably there. "It's just the wind," Evelyn said, moving forward. Yet, even as the words left her mouth, a cold knot tightened in her stomach. They reached the heart of the orchard just as the clock in the nearby town square began its midnight chimes. At the 12th bell, the trees stirred. Buds along the gnarled branches swelled rapidly, bursting open in a ghostly display. Pale fruit glowed with an unearthly light, casting eerie shadows that danced against the darkened earth. Lucas stepped closer, mesmerized. "It's beautiful," he breathed, tongue darting out nervously, "like nothing I've ever seen." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Beautiful doesn't mean safe. Margaret reached out hesitantly, fingertips brushing the glowing fruit. A sudden chill shot through her arm, and she recoiled, eyes wide with a terror she could not name. As they stood under the strange luminescence, a sense of being watched settled over them. The orchard felt alive, a breathing entity that welcomed them with both invitation and threat. Later, as they set up in the old farmhouse on the edge of the property, the townspeople's legends began to seep into their thoughts, whispers heard in the local diner, cryptic warnings from the few who still called the place home. "They say the orchard only blooms for those it claims," an old man told Evelyn that afternoon, his eyes clouded with fear and regret. Blood is the price, and hunger the debt. Evelyn dismissed the words as superstition, but the weight of them lingered like a shadow behind every creak and sigh of the night. Lucas, ever restless, was already planning another venture into the orchard under the cloak of darkness. Margaret, pale and trembling, sat by the window, whispering to the glowing fruit, her voice barely audible. And Evelyn, standing watch over them all, felt the first stirrings of a dread she could neither shake nor fully understand. The midnight orchard had awoken, and with it, the cursed legacy of the Holloway family had begun anew. As the moon carved silver paths through the twisted branches, the glowing fruit pulsed softly, a beacon of beauty and menace intertwined. The question hung heavy in the air: what had they truly inherited? And could they survive the orchard's hunger? The night stretched on, thick with silence and secrets, as the Holloways braced themselves for the darkness to come. The old Holloway house creaked under the weight of years and neglect, its wooden floors groaning beneath Evelyn's cautious footsteps. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon light, leaking through cracked shutters, settling on forgotten relics of a time long past. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and decay, a tangible reminder of the family's long absence from this place. Evelyn moved deliberately through the rooms, her fingers trailing along peeling wallpaper and warped door frames as she sought answers in the shadows. In the parlor, a battered leather-bound journal lay half-buried beneath a mound of yellowing letters and brittle photographs. She pulled it free, the spine cracking faintly with protest. The faded ink inside was ornate and hurried, scrawled in a hand both familiar and alien. Her eyes scanned the pages, absorbing tales of an orchard that bloomed only at night, its fruit glowing with an unnatural light that both mesmerized and terrified. The entries spoke of blood sacrifices, unholy pacts, and a hunger that devoured more than just soil and sun. Evelyn's heart pounded as she connected the dark dots stitched into her family's legacy. Meanwhile, as dusk gave way to night, Lucas slipped out of the house, a small satchel slung over his shoulder. His restless energy propelled him toward the orchard, where the twisted branches loomed like specters against the moonlit sky. The glowing fruit pulsed softly in the gloom, casting an eerie light that flickered like embers in a dying fire. Ignoring the warnings Evelyn had laid upon him hours earlier, Lucas reached out, brushing his fingers against the smooth, cold surface of a glowing apple. The orchard seemed to hum beneath his touch, a low vibration that resonated deep in his bones. A sudden rustle in the underbrush made him freeze, breath catching in his throat. The orchard was alive in ways he hadn't imagined, and the danger was far greater than he'd guessed. Back inside, Margaret sat by the window, her pale face bathed in the orchard's ghostly glow. Her eyes were wide and unfocused, lips moving in soft whispers that no one could quite catch. Visions unfurled behind her eyelids, fruit bursting with crimson sap, shadows writhing beneath twisted boughs, a chilling voice beckoning her closer. She shivered, clutching a faded shawl around her slender shoulders. The weight of the orchard pressed upon her fragile spirit, pulling her deeper into a world of secrets and dread. The following day, at the local diner, the Holloways sought answers among the wary townsfolk. Harriet Bell sat across from Evelyn, her sharp eyes gleaming beneath furrowed brows. The din of plates and murmured conversations filled the room, but Harriet's voice cut through the noise with a crispness that commanded attention. "The orchard isn't just a patch of trees," Harriet said, tapping a notebook thick with scribbled notes and half-forgotten lore. "It's a living curse, bound to the Holloway bloodline. Your ancestors made a pact long before anyone remembers. Blood for fruit, life for life. The town's silence is its own kind of protection. Evelyn's gaze hardened, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place with a terrible clarity. The orchard's sinister nature was no legend, it was a binding truth, one that clawed at the edges of her family's history and threatened their very existence. Lucas's nighttime escapades, Margaret's haunting visions, and Evelyn's relentless pursuit of the truth converged in a tense web of fear and resolve. The Holloways stood at the threshold of a dark inheritance, their every step shadowed by the orchard's insatiable hunger. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the orchard stirred once more, the siblings braced themselves for the night's bloom, unaware that the secrets they uncovered were only the beginning of a much darker journey. The wind whispered through the cracked window panes, carrying with it the faint scent of glowing fruit and something far more sinister. The Holloway family's fate was entwined with the orchard's cursed roots, and the echoes of the past would not be silenced without a price. As midnight approached, the orchard began to awaken again, its luminous fruit casting an otherworldly glow that promised revelation and terror equal measure. Evelyn closed the journal with a soft snap, her eyes reflecting both determination and dread. "We need to understand this," she said quietly, voice steady despite the turmoil within, "before it's too late." Outside, Lucas vanished into the orchard's embrace, drawn by the fruit's eerie light and the secrets it held. Margaret's whispered prayers mingled with the night air, a fragile shield against the darkness encroaching on their lives. The Holloways were caught in a tide of ancient magic and blood, and the night was only just beginning. As the glowing fruit pulsed in the darkness, the family's fragile hope flickered like a candle in a storm. What they would find in the orchard's depths, truth, horror, or something far worse remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, the past had awoken, and it would not let go without a fight. The orchard's whispers grew louder, promising revelations that would change everything. And somewhere in the shadows, the hunger waited, patient and eternal. The night held its breath. The sun had barely slipped below the horizon when the Holloways gathered in the parlor, the air thick with anticipation and a creeping chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. Evelyn stood by the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, eyes dark pools reflecting the orchard's distant glow. Lucas paced restlessly near the hearth, his restless energy barely contained, while Margaret sat silently on the worn armchair, fingers nervously twisting the hem of her dress. A sharp knock interrupted the uneasy silence. The door creaked open, revealing Reverend Caleb Marks, his gaunt figure framed by the fading light. Dressed in his customary dark robes, the lines etched deep into his face told stories of long nights and heavy burdens. He stepped inside, carrying the weight of silence that followed him like a shadow. "Evelyn, Lucas, Margaret." His voice was low, hesitant. "May I come in?" Without waiting for a reply, he entered, settling into a stiff-backed chair with the solemnity of a man bearing unwelcome news. Evelyn exchanged a brief glance with her siblings, the unspoken question hanging between them. What did he know? What had he come to tell? Reverend Marks cleared his throat, eyes flickering to the window, where the orchard's twisted branches clawed at the night sky. "This orchard," he began, "is no ordinary land. It is bound by a pact older than the town itself, a pact sealed in blood and sacrifice." Lucas scoffed under his breath, but Evelyn silenced him with a sharp look. "What kind of pact?" The Reverend's gaze darkened. "A curse, if you will. The orchard feeds not on soil or sun, but on blood. The families who tend it, the Holloways among them, are bound to it by this ancient agreement." Margaret's fingers tightened around her dress, her pale face growing paler still. "I've seen it," she whispered, voice trembling. "The fruit. It's alive. It calls to me." Reverend Marks nodded slowly. "Your visions are no coincidence. The orchard's presence grows stronger with each generation, demanding more to sustain its unnatural life." Before Evelyn could ask more, a sharp rap at the door announced the arrival of Harriet Bell. The short, wiry woman slipped inside, her piercing eyes scanning the room as she clutched a battered notebook close. "I couldn't help but overhear," Harriet said, her voice sharp with urgency. "The orchard's history is steeped in sacrifice. Families before yours have paid dearly to keep its hunger at bay." She opened her notebook, revealing pages filled with cryptic notes and faded newspaper clippings. There are stories, whispers of children lost, of blood spilled beneath the moonlight. The town has always kept its distance, but the truth is buried just beneath the surface. Evelyn felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Why didn't anyone tell us? Harriet shrugged, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. Because some secrets are safer left in the dark. But the orchard won't be silenced forever. As the night deepened, the Holloways found themselves caught in a web of fear and suspicion. Lucas, fueled by restless defiance, challenged the grim warnings, pushing Evelyn's resolve to the brink. "We can fight this," he insisted, voice harsh with frustration. "We don't have to be prisoners to some old curse." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "And what if you're wrong? What if this thing is more than just stories and superstition?" Their voices rose, clashing in the shadowed room as the orchard's glow seemed to pulse in rhythm with their turmoil. Margaret retreated to a corner, her whispering growing more urgent, her eyes clouded with a trance-like intensity. "It's watching," she murmured, waiting. Reverend Marks exchanged a grim look with Harriet, the weight of their shared knowledge pressing down on the fragile family. The night stretched on, thick with unspoken fears and mounting unease. Outside, twisted branches swayed in the moonlight, the glowing fruit casting eerie shadows that danced like specters. The orchard was alive, not just with its unnatural bloom, but with a sentient hunger that threatened to consume them all. As dawn approached, Evelyn stood at the window once more, the first light casting long shadows over the land they now called home. The whispers in the orchard were growing louder, and the Holloway's fragile trust was beginning to fracture under the strain. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one truth was clear: the orchard's dark legacy would not be denied. The family would have to confront it or be consumed by it. And as the morning mist curled around the gnarled branches, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper carried on the wind, promising that the worst was yet to come. The heavy wooden desk groaned under the weight of years as Evelyn pried open a hidden drawer she had never noticed before. The air inside the old Holloway estate was thick with dust and the musk of forgotten memories, curling around her like a shroud as she sifted through brittle papers and faded photographs. Her fingers trembled slightly, heart pounding with a strange mixture of hope and dread. Then, beneath a tattered stack of letters, she found it, a bundle of aged parchment, tied with a thin leather cord, the wax seal cracked and stained dark red like dried blood. She broke the seal with a whispering crack, the scent of old ink and something faintly metallic rising from the pages. Unfolding the papers carefully, Evelyn's eyes darted over the looping script, the words twisting in her mind like the gnarled branches outside. It was a pact, an ancient agreement between the Holloways and the orchard, written centuries ago in a language part Latin, part something older, more arcane. The terms were chilling. The orchard was no ordinary land. It was alive, insatiable, and it fed not on soil, sun, or rain, but on blood. The family was bound to feed it, or else suffer its wrath. Evelyn's breath caught as she read on, the document detailing sacrifices made by past generations to keep the orchard alive and their lineage protected, but at a terrible cost. The fruit that glowed with an unnatural light at midnight was not just fruit. It was a vessel for the orchard's hunger, its glowing flesh a lure and a trap. Meanwhile, outside, under the cold gaze of the moon, Lucas was already testing the boundaries of their new reality. Compelled by a reckless curiosity, he stealthily slipped past the creaking porch steps and into the orchard's embrace. The glowing fruit hung like orbs of eerie fire, pulsing softly in the night breeze. His hand reached out, trembling with a mix of fear and defiance, to pluck one from a low branch. The fruit was warm to the touch, almost alive, and as he pulled it free, it suddenly burst open, splattering thick crimson liquid across his hands and face. A sharp, guttural sound vibrated from the orchard, the branches seeming to twist and writhe as if alive. Panic surged through Lucas as the fruit's blood dripped down his arm. The orchard's hunger awakened and angry. He stumbled back, heart racing, desperate to clean himself, but knowing instinctively that this was no ordinary wound. The orchard was claiming him, marking him as part of its dark covenant. The next morning, tense and shaken, the Holloway siblings gathered in the cold kitchen where morning light struggled through grimy windows. The ancient pact lay spread across the table, its presence oppressive and undeniable. Evelyn's voice was steady but heavy with the burden of leadership as she read aloud, translating the archaic script for Lucas and Margaret. The words hung in the air like a curse. The orchard's survival depended on blood, and the Holloways were its unwilling providers. Margaret's pale face tightened as she clutched a glowing fruit she had taken from the kitchen counter, whispering softly to it in a trance-like murmur. Her visions, once subtle, now pressed on her mind with relentless force a tapestry of dark rituals, whispered bargains, and the cries of those lost to the orchard's hunger. Tensions flared as Lucas's reckless night was revealed, his defiance a dangerous spark in an already volatile situation. Evelyn chastised him fiercely, the weight of her responsibility pressing down like a stone on her chest. Their bonds, already strained by fear and suspicion, trembled on the edge of shattering. In the midst of their turmoil, a sudden knock echoed through the house. Harriet Bell stepped into the dim light, her wiry frame and sharp eyes cutting through the gloom. She carried a leather-bound notebook and an urgency that silenced the room. Her voice was low, urgent, and edged with warnings. She revealed fragments of the town's history, stories of sacrifices made, families broken, and curses that refused to die. "You don't want to defy the orchard," Harriet warned. "It's older than this town, older than your family. It feeds on blood, yes, but it binds souls. Breaking the pact isn't freedom, it's death." The siblings listened, caught between the desire to escape and the paralyzing fear of what that might mean. Evelyn's resolve hardened. They had inherited more than land. They had inherited a legacy soaked in blood and shadow. To survive, to protect each other, they would have to understand the orchard's hunger and find a way to fight it before it consumed them all. As night fell once more, the orchard's glow pulsed ominously beyond the windows, a silent reminder that the family's darkest chapter was only just beginning. The blood ties that bound them were tightening, and in the silence, the question lingered: how far were they willing to go to break free from a curse older than memory itself?